Good day, everyone. First off, thank you for staging this online conference, Commonplaces in Our Lives. I'm coming to you from Cebu with my topic, Grayscale Memento on Skin, the lineage of tattoo artistry in the Visayas, and I'm excited to learn from my fellow presenters across the Philippines. My name is Johanna Michelle Lim, and I am a practicing essayist, having published two books, a book on travel and the Philippine seas. But as a profession, part of what I do is research and strategy for the Philippine creative industries, which is perhaps where the fascination for this subject matter comes from. Let me start the discussion with this question. If you were to be asked, ang tattoo ay simbolo ng, a tattoo symbolizes, what would you answer? How would you continue that line? Feel free to answer silently in your seats. In 2020, a self-learning module said to be approved by the Department of Education posed this very same question, with one of the possible multi-set answers being A. Isang kriminal, being a criminal, closely associating tattooed individuals with a criminal act or perhaps worse, a life of crime. And it might not be unwarranted. If you only looked at the Philippine tattoo culture in the 80s and 90s, Filipino social anthropologist Annalyn Salvador Amores says tattoos were deeply associated with deviant behavior then. Having one meant a tattooed individual was subject to discrimination, limiting their employment opportunities. There are still industries that ban tattooed individuals from applying, for instance, and even applying or limiting their ability to contribute to society. So, for a time, it was wrongly perceived that individuals with tattoos were banned from donating blood to blood banks. Despite this, though, many Filipinos harbor a secret sentiment to get inked or branded, as others might call it. Some may be saving design after design on their Pinterest boards. Tattoos to us are now symbols of individual expression instead of having a greater communal meaning. It need not mean anything to the larger society anymore, and it need not be earned. There is now more freedom to get inked, yes, but being a tattooed person is still a secret alternative self for many of us. And why is that? The inner argument whether to get a tattoo or not can perhaps be traced to what the patik, what we call the tattoo in the Visayas, means and what it was used for in our pre-colonial Visayan society. Once called the pintados or the painted ones by Spanish conquistadors, Visayan warriors had to risk life and limb to earn their patik in battle. Most of these tattoos were what they considered powerful animist figures of snakes and lizards and the omnipotent sun placed on their backs and abdomen. Tattoos served as medals, symbols of valor accumulated with each acquired feat. The location of the tattoo also symbolized how decorated the warrior was in battles. Warriors started off with getting tattoos on their legs and on their waists. Labid were the distinctive inch-wide lines, both the straight ones and those which go snaking or zigzagging up the leg. Ablay were tattoos positioned on the shoulder. Dubdub, those on the chest up to the throat, are given to those who have already been in a series of battles. And as the war experiences of the warriors grew in number, the tattoos would also start to cover their backs. And finally, also, we have the daya-daya on the arms. You can see there was really an order how these tattoos were placed on their bodies. The bravest warriors, known as Lipong, considered Spartan elites, had tattoos on their faces and on their eyelids, a signal to challengers of their ability to endure, and were reserved only for the toughest warriors. Historian Henry Walter Scott writes, Such countenances were terrifying and no doubt intimidated enemies in battle as well as townmates at home. So let me share with you a short video on the next slide. So you just saw TikTok creator Jada Desiree attempting to revive the langi, which means gaping, which is a bangut or muzzle in the face design meant to look like the mouth of a crocodile or a bird in flight. So if you notice, tattoos were really meant to be identifiers of your social standing. Jesuit friar Pedro Chirino wrote in his unpublished 1604 manuscript, the principal clothing of the Cebuanos and all the Visayans is the tattooing of which we have already spoken, with which a naked man appears to be dressed in a kind of handsome armor engraved with very fine work, a dress so esteemed by them that they take it for their proudest attire. Now, another account about the pintados, apart from the ones in the Boxer Codex or a Spanish manuscript which holds the earliest record of Philippine tattoo art, also came from Wang Dayuan, who was a Chinese merchant. His book, and I'm sorry for the title, The Descriptions of the Barbarians of the Isles, accounts that many Visayan loot or ship raiders had tattoos, which gave the Visayas the reputation of being ferocious seafarers. He writes, the Visayans live in a remote land in the eastern sea. The natives are fond of pillaging. The males and the females both tie their hair in a top knot, tattoo their bodies here and there with ink, and wrap their heads with a piece of red silk to which a piece of yellow cloth is tied to make a tail. He further writes, upon hearing the name of the Visaya, they are all terrified and flee. Pintados tattoos, because of what they symbolized in the 15th and 16th century society, were considered of a certain value that for a time counterfeits had been done in China. This was, of course, a frowned upon practice because any tattoo done without killing or capturing an enemy was considered cowardice. They likened these men to be halos or monitor lizards, dangerous looking but actually timid. You will see the fascination on Filipino tattoos, that Filipino tattoos bring to external cultures through this photo as well. A 17th century etching by John Savage depicting the painted prince, Gioli or Giolo, a Filipino captive who was exhibited in England to serve as quote unquote living artwork because of his tattoos. Now, sometimes it was the tattoos themselves and not the warfare that would make Visayan warriors succumb to death. Using sharp instruments like a tooth comb containing pitch, soot, and heated over the fire, tattooing was said to be so agonizing that men would pass out and never regain consciousness. Many warriors, according to Scott again, would avoid the operation until they were shamed into it or until they passed away from it. Still, the prestige alone was enough to pursue having these battle emblems without the help of now modern numbing creams to tolerate the pain. If only you can kulmat or strut around with these new geometric patterns on your pectorals or on your buttocks. So as you can see, getting tattooed was a life or death situation. This speaks also to the importance of a skillful tattoo artist who would do the symbols in installments, ensuring that they were adept at knowing when the skin was still in binogok or at a healing period. So just as in modern times, tattoo artists then also charge not only for their services but also for their expertise when the skin was ready to receive new tattoo work again. In time, we know that because of Spanish colonization and the coming of Christianity, there was a suppression and eventual decline in tattooing practices. So much so that if we take the other end of the spectrum now, you have someone like Boots Brandon, the owner and the head artist of Redeemed Studio in Cebu and in Manila, who found tattoo art by way of Christianity. When Brandon was 21, unknown assailants attempted to gun him down. 6 bullets went past him, but unfortunately hit his then best friend, Earl Hardin. And still grieving, he was again stabbed in another incident. These seminal events were enough to send him on a spiral, and Brandon went through every form of escape, drugs and alcohol mostly. Now, afraid for his welfare, Brandon's mother introduced him to Rain Munoz, a former drug addict turned pastor. And Brandon said, the guy had so many tattoos, he looked just like me, and I could relate to him. During their first meeting, Pastor Rain talked about Saint Paul the Apostle, now tattooed on Brandon's left arm, as seen in this photo. Paul was an executioner of the early disciples who prolifically wrote 14 out of the 27 books in the New Testament. So he believed in redemption, and that word somehow stuck in Brandon's head, redeemed, and that's why he named his studio as such. These days, like Brandon Studios, tattoo shops are more like sterilized surgical stations instead of being like a warrior's initiation pit or a raider's loot room, following strict codes given by the Department of Health. In Brandon's studio, everything has to be sanitized and in order. Unlike the Pintados warriors who had uniform tattoos that stood for their social standing, the value of a tattoo now is in its singularity. It is, by and large, intellectual property very similar to a painting. Are you the only one who has this design inked on your skin? And if you are, definitely your tattoo is considered more valuable. Here, Brandon can be seen running me through his process. Once he meets a client, they don't do a tattoo session immediately. He gets to know them, they riff off ideas, then he does heavy R&D on his own. For this particular client who wanted a full sleeve of Alexander the Great, he had to watch 3 documentaries, sketched it in an app called Procreate, and on the day, adjust the form based on the client's arm size. You don't want to put portraits on a curved area because the face might get distorted, said Brandon, showing really his keen eye for anatomy and body placements. This is what tattoo artists are now being paid for. The paghuna-huna or the design of the mind as much as the technical craftsmanship of handling a tattoo pen and machine. In summary, we know the practice of tattooing or the patik has dramatically changed over time. To summarize, whereas once it was more communal, now the decision making is more individualist. Whereas once it was more about a rite of passage or initiation, now the focus is more about expression. The expression of both the one getting inked and the one doing the inking. And whereas it used to be more procedural lang, tattooing now is more experiential. But whether pre-colonial or modern though, the through line among those that delve into tattoos is that so much of this discussion is about having to endure, initiate, and perhaps even have a reverence for self-induced pain from a needle that will microstab you at 50 pokes a minute. I suspect that whenever we ask ourselves whether we should get a tattoo or not, it is a reckoning that peers into our pre-colonial past. Perhaps even by getting a tattoo, there is a partial reclamation of our lineage. To get a tattoo or not is to ask, what have we done to deserve this? Are we someone to be feared or someone who fears? And ultimately, what does this grayscale memento say about us as a person and as part of the bigger whole? Daghang salamat.